Lake County State's Attorney Mike Nerheim, and we're going to speak with him about some of the new programs he's implemented in the office since being elected. So first off, what made you decide to go into law to begin with?
Actually, I always wanted to be an FBI agent, believe it or not, which is why I went to law school. Ever since I was a little kid, I guess I never really grew out of it. And I did a couple internships at the state's attorney's office because I grew up here in Waukegan. And then I fell in love with trial work and with being a prosecutor. So when I graduated from law school, I began a career as an assistant state's attorney. And that's kind of how I sort of fell into law. But ironically, when I went to law school, I never really had any desire of being an attorney. But and here I am.
And so you've also practiced defense as well, right? And what made you decide to switch from prosecution to defense?
So I had been in the office here for, I think, 8 or 9 years, and I had gotten to the point where I had prosecuted, I think everything I was going to prosecute. I had gone through all the divisions. I had started in traffic and then worked into some murder cases. And I just wanted a different challenge in my career. So I had left the office and went into private practice in a small firm in Waukegan, actually right across the street from here. And did primarily criminal defense work, which turned out to be a good thing. In fact, I really enjoyed being a criminal defense attorney. And at the time, I had no idea I would eventually run for this position. But I think it does help because it gives me a perspective that a lot of prosecutors don't have.
Right.
Having been on both sides of the fence is important.
Right.
So.
What was your favorite part of being a defense attorney?
I really feel like I had an opportunity to help people a lot. As a prosecutor, you really never get to meet the defendant for obvious reasons. So you all you know about the case is what you read in the police reports. You talk to the victims, the witnesses, the police, but you never hear personally from the other side of the case. And as a defense attorney, oftentimes it's all you hear from.
Right.
And you get to realize, and you talk to people charged with sometimes pretty serious crimes, and you realize these aren't evil people. These are just normal people that sometimes just did something stupid. And oftentimes they're just trying to get the best deal they can or get out of it the best they can or just make sure they're treated fairly. I had a lot of clients that had, battled with substance abuse issues. So I felt that my job as a defense attorney was first and foremost to represent them in terms of the criminal case. But I also felt that it was a big part of my job to help get them help and to help with treatment and things like that and get them pointed in the right directions. And I think I was able to do that in some cases. Sadly, I had a lot of cases where I wasn't able to do that. And in particular, we have an issue right now in Lake County with heroin. And just in my little firm, I lost a couple clients a year to heroin overdose. And that's tough because you develop a relationship with people and they trust you eventually. And it's hard when you lose people.
Right.
But I do feel like that I was able to help some folks.
And why did you decide to go back to prosecution?
Well, this is a job that I had always, I never really aspired to be the state's attorney, but it's something when I worked here that I thought, this is a pretty amazing job. And if you really want to affect change in a community, there are very few positions where you can do that. And so it slowly began to become a goal of mine. And my predecessor had been in this office for 22 years. So, and he had hired me when I started. And actually, I did 5 internships here before that.
Wow.
So I was a bit of a fixture here. But when he indicated he was going to retire, I thought, well, now's a chance to run. So I had a very long talk with my wife to make sure it was okay with her, because I had never run for any elected office before. This isn't something where I just wanted to run for a position. This is the only position I would ever consider running for. So talked to my family, and I was given the green light. So we began the horrible process of running for office.
And why did you decide to focus on wrongful convictions?
So when I was running, it was an issue in the campaign. It was an issue where there had been, just prior to the campaign, probably the 2 or 3 years preceding, there were a series of cases, 4 cases to be exact, that were coming to light where there had been wrongful convictions in Lake County. And what was starting to happen as the discussion became bigger and bigger, Lake County started to develop a reputation for wrongful convictions, even really on a national level. And that's something that having been a prosecutor, having been a defense attorney, spending every working day of my life in this courthouse,
Yeah.
It's certainly not a reputation you want to have.
Right.
And it's an issue that had to be tackled because we can't have that reputation, and we certainly can't have that reality because as a prosecutor or as a defense attorney, we all recognize that the absolute worst possible outcome in any criminal case is that an innocent person is convicted. I mean, our entire criminal justice system is set up to ensure that that does not happen. And when it does happen, something seriously wrong has occurred, and we got to make sure it doesn't happen, because then not only is it horrible to convict somebody innocently, but then what starts to happen is the trust that the public has in the system, and in particular in law enforcement and prosecutors and police, that trust starts to break down, and then the whole system starts to break down. So it was a focal point of mine. I had a case when I was a defense attorney where one of the co-defendants, it was a murder case, had confessed to a murder that he did not commit, because people tend to think, well, why would somebody confess to something they didn't do unless maybe they were tortured?
Right.
And I, to some extent, used to think that myself until there's an 8-hour confession of a young man being interrogated where he confesses to a murder, and then later on it turns out he wasn't there. He was actually on video with his church group at a restaurant at the time of the shooting. So you see that it does happen. And what's scary about that case, not to get into the details because we could talk about that case for an hour, but what's really scary about that case is the police officer, the detective, they truly believe they had the right person. It's not as if they said, well, this guy's innocent, let's just put this crime on him. They had a co-defendant who had identified some other individuals as being involved, and 3 of the 4 of the individuals that he had identified actually were involved, but one of them was not. So all the information that the detectives were getting was panning out, with the exception of this person. And as a prosecutor, that's the scariest scenario, when you have everybody that really believes they have the right person and they don't.
Would you say that tunnel vision is often a problem when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think that cognitive bias is the big contributor to wrongful convictions. When you look at this issue nationwide, where it happens all over, because certainly Lake County, we're talking about 4 cases, but this sadly is something that happens all over the country. And when you look at why this happens or how this happens, I think you can attribute it to really 2 different causes, not to oversimplify it, but one is bad cops and bad prosecutors. And that's almost the easier solution, because you just find out who those bad cops and bad prosecutors are, and you charge and get rid of them. The second cause, and I think probably the more common cause and the scarier cause, is that cognitive bias, or that tunnel vision that we all have as human beings, where we look at a set of facts and we read police reports, we read witness statements, and we in our minds start to develop what we think happened, and then we focus on that. We all do it, and that's a dangerous phenomenon, because what happens then is, as you know, is you can disregard pieces of evidence that might point into a different direction, sometimes even almost subconsciously. And, so when I looked at this issue, and I thought about what is the best way to tackle that, to overcome that, I focused on that cognitive bias, and the best way to overcome that.
And what exactly is the role of the review panel?
So getting to that, I thought the best way to overcome cognitive bias is to have really a fresh set of eyes on cases, because you might develop that tunnel vision, but somebody else who hears the case fresh may see something that you missed, and that can be as simple as going home and running over the facts with your spouse at night at dinner, which we all do, which is actually, I think, a good thing to do, a good practice to be in, or going over a set of facts with a fellow attorney prior to a trial. But to make that a little bit more of a formal process, what I decided to do was to put together a panel of people that aren't necessarily from the area, that aren't necessarily tied to any of these cases, and I call it the case review panel. But essentially what they are retired, I have some retired judges, defense attorneys, civil rights attorneys, retired prosecutors, civil attorneys. So you have a lot of different background, people from south side of Chicago that have really never been to Lake County, people from DuPage County. There's one individual who is a retired just one person. He was a judge, a public defender,
Mm-hmm.
and a state's attorney. So that's sort of a one-person
Oh.
review panel.
Right.
And we give these cases to the panel, and they review it, and individually they review it, and then also in a group setting to see if there's any issues that any of us may have missed.
Right.
And I think it's been really effective, and I get calls often from other prosecutors' offices around the country looking to develop that type of a system.
Mm-hmm.
The other way to do it is, I think, the more common way, which is the conviction integrity unit, which you read about happening often. I think the Cook County State's Attorney's Office has one, and that's a great model too. And I think the first one was in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, with Craig Watkins.
So I've studied that a little bit, and you see those. There's actually a North Carolina statewide version of that, which is an interesting concept. But what I thought, I think those are more effective in big offices, like in Dallas, like in Chicago, where you have 800 assistant state's attorneys. Most prosecutors' offices around the country are small to mid-size offices. Right. Now, this Lake County, where we are now, it's a big office in Illinois. I think we're the third biggest state's attorney's office in Illinois. There's about 150 people that work here. So it's big compared to most prosecutors' offices in the state. However, even at that size, we're kind of like a big family here, which is a good thing. I mean, if you work here, it's a nice environment. Everybody knows each other. They socialize with each other, and they go to each other's kids' soccer games and all that kind of stuff, which is important for morale. But what happens if you're called upon to review somebody's case, and the goal is to bring a completely fresh set of eyes, if you have a close relationship with your colleagues, sometimes that's going to be clouded because I'm going to go into a case, and I know you, I've worked with you, we've handled cases together, I know you're a good person, I know you're an honest person, I know you're a critical thinker, and then if I'm called upon to review something you did, I'm going into it with that mindset, so I might not be as critical as maybe I should be. And it's not to say you ever did anything wrong, it's just the whole point of this is to try and break through that cognitive bias. So I think in small to mid-size offices, it's a little bit more effective to go outside, to have completely independent, fresh eyes look at some of these cases. If you can do it, I'm lucky enough to have a group of volunteers, so this doesn't cost the taxpayers any money. And these people, like I said, they volunteer their time and a good deal of their time to review these cases. I also like to think that our entire office functions as a conviction integrity unit, though, because really the job of a prosecutor, and we preach this, it's our ethical duty, is to seek justice, not convictions. So, when I was elected, I met with every prosecutor in this office one-to-one. In fact, every support staff, everybody in the office, and made sure that they heard it from me that I don't care how many convictions you get. In fact, I don't even want you to keep track of your win-loss record. If you walk down the hallway and ask any one of my assistants what their win-loss record is, they better not be able to tell you, because they shouldn't be going into these cases just to win. And we do the best we can. We develop evidence. We present our case to the jury, or we negotiate cases. In fact, most cases are negotiated. But that's the philosophy of this office, is to seek justice, not just go out and get convictions. And we put a lot of effort from the beginning to make sure we are charging the right cases, or not charging cases that shouldn't be charged. And really, I think the most effective way to prevent wrongful convictions is way up front, where you're making those charging decisions, to not charge cases that shouldn't be charged. So we've done a lot by way of training, by way of shifting personnel around with our felony review division, which is essentially the gateway into the criminal justice system. We're doing a lot more vertical prosecution, where we're getting our attorneys involved pre-charging, working with the police, particularly in our sexual assault crimes, because that's an area of law where once you charge somebody with that type of an offense, you better have it right, because you charge somebody with predatory criminal sexual assault, and then you find out 2 months later that they didn't actually do it, and you dismiss the case, you've already ruined their life just by simply being charged with that. So we know that. We get it. So but we also make sure that we're aware those are very serious crimes, and we have to charge them when we have the evidence. But there's a lot of effort put into making sure early on, before we even charge a case, before we pull that trigger, that we have the facts we need to charge the case. And the hardest decision prosecutors make, quite frankly, are the ones where we know the guy did it,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't have the evidence to prove it, and we have to not charge the case, and we have to look a victim in the eye and say we can't charge the case, and here's why.
Yeah.
And we do that all the time, and those are
Mm-hmm.
cases nobody ever hears about. Nobody ever will hear about them, but those
Right.
happen every day in prosecutors' offices, really all over the country. But I think the best way to avoid wrongful convictions is be a prosecutor,
Yeah.
because we're doing it every day.
Mm-hmm.